Welcome back to Monday Musings, a casual conversation about culture and theology. I'm Justin Ely.
And I'm Daniel Chen. We're just a couple guys talking about some stuff.
And the stuff we're going to talk about today is schooling. Homeschooling, private schooling, public schooling. Which one? 1, 2, 3, go.
No, I'm just kidding. This is something that people are really passionate about.
People have their opinions.
People are really opinionated about this. And so, I don't know. We'll probably unintentionally make someone mad probably in this podcast.
In fact, if a confession can be had in the beginning, this is actually our second recording of this podcast. And the reason it's our second recording is I felt my first was a little too opinionated. So if you want to become a platinum giver of the podcast, we will release that episode to you. It is still in the cloud somewhere, you know.
Since the average giving is $0, $1 will probably get you.
Put you in the platinum club.
Yeah.
So just throwing that out there. But before we begin our conversation about schooling, we're going to go with the restaurant of the month, except we're going to do this week, what is your best and favorite fast food French fry of the month?
Yeah, I think we're gonna keep the of the month segment, but I think we might be a little bit add some fun things in here.
We're about diversity here.
As if you listen to our old episodes, we're all about that diversity.
Yeah.
And if you don't know, go listen to our past episodes, and you understand why we're laughing.
I mean, you have an ethnicity. Me too.
Whoa.
We have two different ethnicities. Yeah.
Yeah. And technically, I guess.
But we're both pink on the inside.
I don't even know what that means.
You're... All right, moving on.
Right.
Fast food fry of the month. Mine is McDonald's. I don't think you can beat a McDonald's French fry.
McDonald's is good. And, it's so funny we're having this conversation again, but...
For the second time. Because people don't have access to the first recording unless they're a platinum giver.
Yep, exactly. And, I got a text this week that was like, "Where's my musings, bro?" And it was the best text I've ever gotten.
Yeah. That's how in demand we are.
To my friend who sent that to me, thank you.
You'll probably be a future listener of the month.
Yeah, you will be. Yes, absolutely.
So my argument is, as Jim Gaffigan says in one of his comedy routines, has your mom ever made something as good as a McDonald's fry? Of course not. So yeah, the McDonald's French fry, it's a keeper.
It's very classic. So I'm all about in anything, but especially with food, I'm all about ratios, and you need the right ratio, right?
Crispy to potato.
Yeah. So the crispy to the soft.
Yep.
I'm actually my favorite type of fry in general is I like them slightly bigger than the McDonald's fries. I like the ones that are breaded in flour and have a soft potatoey mouth feel when you eat it.
Okay.
But it's very crispy on the outside.
Okay.
And there's not enough potato for me in the McDonald's fry. Isn't that interesting?
Got it. Yep.
I mean, I'll eat it. I like them.
Sure.
And did you know they used to use beef fat to fry the fries, and they used to be even better. But then, the equivalent of the Wokies of the 90s,
the PETA.
No, it was a health thing. Remember back in the day, it was don't eat fats, but it turns out there's good fat and bad fat, and so all of these food companies removed all fat from their foods and just added sugar, which is 10 times worse for you.
Was this the same time in human history where people were eat a tub of cottage cheese because it's healthy for you? Was that the same epoch of history?
Cottage cheese is top 3 on my list of grossest food.
I mean, at least by looks.
It's a texture thing for me. I can't do it.
Yeah.
I actually will gag if I put any cottage cheese in my mouth. It's disgusting to me.
Wow. So if you want to know how to make Daniel gag, now you know.
Yeah. Cottage cheese. I don't know in what practical way that would be helpful for you to know that knowledge.
Well, if someone wanted to torture you, get information out of you about what we said in the first recording of this podcast, instead of becoming a platinum giver, they could go the cottage cheese route.
Kidnap me and force feed me cottage cheese.
Right, exactly.
I'll tell you what, if you do that, I'll tell you whatever you want to know. But I'll probably tell you anyways without you doing that.
What's your fry?
Is a classic answer.
Yeah.
Mine is Checkers. I love Checkers fries. I'm a seasoned fry guy. Also, the Checkers fries fits that ratio that I was talking about.
Okay.
Where it's crispy on the outside, but it is more potatoey.
Yeah.
But it's just the seasoning. It just tastes so good. You don't need any sauce for for a Checkers fry. And I just think in general, Checkers is an underrated fast food restaurant. But the problem is, why do people like Chick-fil-A?
Because it's Christian. It makes you feel closer to God. You feel like you're supporting a good organization. Truett Cathy prayed for the meal before you did even got it, so you don't have to pray for it.
Right.
All of those reasons.
Of course. But from a food perspective, it's the consistency.
Yep.
Right? That's really what it is. And the problem with most fast food restaurants isn't the flavor of the food. A lot of times it's the consistency.
Right.
And so that's what Checkers is too. Like if you get a good Checkers experience, their food, their burgers and stuff is excellent. But if you have like a bad Checkers experience, it is horrendous.
Really?
Yeah. So it's kind of like Popeyes. I feel the same way about Popeyes.
Well, you're gonna have to wait forever out of Popeyes.
Yeah. The experience is pretty bad. Their food is delicious though. So Popeyes fries are also similar to Checkers fries.
Yeah, they're in the same kind of category.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
So let us know what
Restaurant
is your
fry of the month.
Yeah, what is your favorite fast food fry? We'd love to hear from you and know. And I guess I'll take this opportunity to tell you too, if this podcast has been influential to you in your eating or in your spiritual life or in just any way.
Please like us.
Yeah, give us a like, a follow, and we'd love for you to share it with a friend.
Yeah, there you go. So today we're talking about public school, private school, homeschool. What should Christian parents do for their kids? I think it'd be interesting for us to start with how we grew up. So were you public, private, or homeschool?
Yeah. So I was public school. That's all I knew. It was, I didn't know anything better. I always thought when growing up, I didn't know a ton of homeschool kids. I think it was just a lot less popular back in the day.
It kind of feels that way. Yeah.
We'll get to this section of why we're talking about this, but I saw something on Facebook. Statistically, there was 2 million kids that unenrolled from public school last year, and then homeschooling has doubled in the past 5 years.
So COVID really accelerated.
Pure double.
Yep.
Yeah, and so, but I was public school. I always thought private school was just for like rich stuck up kids, which is funny because my public school was just filled with rich stuck up kids. I didn't know that.
You were an East Cobb snob.
I was definitely an East Cobb snob. I mean, I feel so bad, and this is like why it's good to have life experience. I did not know people lived in apartments until I was in 9th grade.
I'm
not
a true
kidding.
East Cobb snob.
Yeah. I mean, because every single person, 100% of the people I knew lived in a house that was this house I lived in or bigger.
Yeah.
Like we were considered like, in our area, we were like lower middle class, but it wasn't until I went to college that I found out that I grew up upper middle class.
No,
yeah.
same way.
I had no idea. And so even going to public school, I had no idea because everyone at my public school was, not everyone, but in general, was a very, very wealthy public school.
Yeah.
And so, but I really loved my experience there.
Yeah.
Obviously there were times where I was bullied and there was stuff not so great, but in general, I was very supportive, and we'll get to at the end where we land. But for, I was public school all the way growing up,
Yep.
and for a long time. So,
yeah, and I very similar story to yours. I public school K to 12th, and then went to a public university, University of Georgia. My mom was a public high school teacher. My grandfather was a public elementary principal and then deputy superintendent of DeKalb County Schools. My aunt was a public school teacher. My grandmother was a public school teacher. So I come from a long line of public school people.
Man.
Yeah.
I didn't know that about you.
Yeah. So we got public school through our veins.
Do you between like your generation, like our generation, like is your sister a teacher or any cousins or anything?
My cousin was a teacher.
Okay.
And is like a stay-at-home mom now.
Okay.
But yeah, so it continued, I guess. And I guess I'm a type of teacher, I mean, I'm a pastor, so yeah. So
don't send your kids to our church for school, please.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
we don't.
We're not doing that. Yeah, we are not doing that. I have seen the problems. In middle school, we thought a local private Christian school, Mount Pisgah Christian School, was offering a discount half off tuition. So I went for a shadow day. And then we found out that that was like lasting like a year. So they were like, yeah, sorry, you're going to keep doing public school. So so I experienced private school for like a day, and it was really cool, and everyone wore the same clothes. I like that. You know? So yeah, that was, and I had a great, great faith building experience throughout public school. I had some really great Christian teachers that really impacted me, and so yeah, I'm grateful for my experience. But why are we talking about this now?
So we're talking about now partially because public school just started where we're at in Fulton County in Georgia. And also, I've just seen this discussion a lot. So Matt Walsh posted this last week sometime, and really just got me thinking. I feel like as the politics in our country becomes more and more extreme to either side.
Yeah.
This public school, private school, homeschool conversation is also going to become more and more extreme.
Sure.
And so I'm going to read you this quote, and then that spurned this. And so maybe you agree with this quote, listening out there. Maybe you don't. I'm reading this neutrally, just as a launching point to our discussion.
Sure.
He said, "My responsibility is to my children and my family. The public school system cannot be saved. Even if it could, I am not sending my kids in to help with that mission, not their job. They are not equipped. No child is. I hear parents say that they won't leave the school system because they want to fight. But it's not you doing the fighting. It's your child, and he cannot win it. You are sending him on a suicide mission. It isn't fair to him. The school system is undefeated. It changes children. Children do not change it. But yes, keep feeding your kids into the meat grinder. Maybe it will be different this time. You know it won't be, but you tell yourself that. Save your own. Get them out. Let the system collapse and die."
So what do you think Matt Walsh thinks about public schooling?
Right. You know, this is unlike Matt Walsh to be so extreme in his view.
He doesn't seem like a very opinionated person most of the time.
I'm just kidding. If you don't follow Matt Walsh, he's a conservative political commentator, and he is very extreme in all his views. And I mean, that's just the way he talks, right?
Yeah.
That's how you do media these days is, you know.
That's why we're so popular.
Right. But, you know, I've heard this kind of idea before. Pull your kids out of the public school. Even if you follow, there's a pastor named Vodi Bakum who we've talked about on this podcast. He has this quote that is, if you send your kids to Caesar, don't be surprised that they come back Romans.
Sure.
Meaning that you're sending your kids to public school or private school, if you don't homeschool, you're sending your kids out 7 to 9 hours a day to be influenced in the way they think, what they're taught out into the world that you're not there with them, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so he's saying, don't be surprised if your kids come back being, I guess,
like the culture.
Like the culture. What do you think about this quote?
The Vodi Bakum one or the Matt Walsh?
Both. Like, what do you think about how this all plays out? Because I think there's definitely good warnings in both of these quotes. Yeah. But I'm not sure I'm like fully on board of like on the jump ship. Right. And so we're going to talk about this more at the end, but just as we kick off, as we discuss, so what we're going to do is we're going to discuss each one, the pros and cons of each one. Right. But I mean, this is what really brought up my thinking of why this needed to be talked about, because this stuff is going around. Yeah. And conversations do need to happen. So,
you know, I feel like there are kind of like two extremes that I want to avoid. Right. Not to do a classic third wayism here, but I feel like one extreme, is kind of the Matt Walsh thing, which is like everything's on fire, run. Right. Another extreme that I see people toward is just kind of an autopilot. Like, I'm just going to do what I did. Right. And I turned out fine. So any argument opposite to what I was raised, I'm going to immediately be offended by and just shut it off. Right. So, like, I don't think that's good either. Like, so I think it's like, this is, because like you said, your kids spend so much time at school. This is a worthy thing to really think and debate about. Right. So, yeah. Yeah,
and just to be upfront, we believe if you're listening, you have kids, you need to discuss this deeply with your spouse.
Yeah.
and make a decision that's best for your family.
Yeah.
That's really, I mean, if you hear from us, that's what we're going to support.
Yep.
We're not going to sit here and tell you, you need to do
You must do this.
this, or this. I do believe there is a time in culture
Sure.
you might hear us say that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that time is now.
Yeah.
So I think what we would tell you right now, discuss these pros and cons.
Yep.
And figure out what works best for your family.
Yeah.
We're gonna jump into.
So Daniel has this article from equippinggodlywomen.com. It's his favorite website. Reads it
I do it with
devotionally
my
every morning.
quiet time every morning.
Yep. It's really, really good, helpful thing for Daniel.
You know, just to defend myself a little bit, of why, because I don't want to like promote this website because I don't really know anything about it except for this one article.
I mean, it's a helpful article.
So I just typed in. I wanted to have a good outline to go through so I just typed in homeschool, private school, public school into the Google machine, and this is what it spit out, and it was really helpful.
And,
so,
here at Monday Musings, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. If someone already has an outline, we will use that and put them in the show notes.
yes, we'll put them in the show notes, and then we'll add our own little spin to it.
Flavor. So that's what we're going to do. So these authors start with the pros of homeschooling. So we're going to go through pros and cons of homeschooling, public schooling, and private schooling. So starting with homeschooling, the authors on equippinggodlywomen.com list first, you're in charge of your child's learning. You can build your homeschooling schedule around your family's needs. You can prioritize your family's values. You can educate from a biblical worldview. You have more opportunities to build family relationships. You can, go to the aquarium during the day, or take a, just different approach. And finally, you can protect your children from negative social influences. All the bullying and stuff you can protect them from.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on these pros?
Yeah, for me, I think there are a lot of pros to homeschooling. I think,
and we have a fair number of families at our church that do homeschooling.
There are. Yeah. And even at our church, we have a lot of, most homeschooling families do a co-op. So just to let you guys know, there's like pure homeschooling, I guess, where 5 days a week.
That's it. You're at home.
Most of our families that do homeschooling, I'm pretty sure maybe all of them do something like classical conversations, or, a lot of there's some adults at our church that went to a place called King's Academy, which like you did work at your home 3 days a week and then you went to school.
Yep.
It's kind of a hybrid model.
Yep.
But I would say the one that sticks out to me the most is you can prioritize your family's values.
Sure.
I think the idea of building a worldview, and this is what I want to say, no matter which school you choose, you parents are responsible for helping developing your child's worldview.
Yeah.
And I would say there's some people that will push back that say, oh, Christians indoctrinate their kids. And I would say everyone indoctrinates their kids.
Yep.
If you don't indoctrinate your kids in the Christian worldview, the world is going to indoctrinate your kids. So regardless,
100%.
Even at homeschool, once they get a smartphone, someone's going to indoctrinate them.
Yep.
Right? And so you prioritize your family. I mean, that's probably absolutely number one for me of why you would do this.
Yeah.
Is because you want to, help build your kids' worldview.
Yep.
And also, I would say too, the other reason too is because I know for my wife and I, she had considered homeschooling because she just, I think this is a great argument. You only get so much time with your kids when they're young.
Yeah.
Why not
leverage it?
Spend as much time as you can with your kids. And I thought that was a really compelling reason.
Yeah, and I think one of their ones, you have more opportunity to build family relationships. I think it's really neat that from a homeschooling perspective, if you're talking about the Civil War, we're going to take a trip up to Gettysburg. And we're just family road trip, and you can do that.
And you're in Tennessee, might as well go to Dollywood.
The great American experiment.
Yes.
So yeah, I like that you can really make the education a family project. and being in charge of your kids' learning. Like, every kid is different. And the downside to a public or private education is because you have so many kids there, it has to a certain degree, kind of be a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
And that doesn't work for every kid. So homeschooling really does allow you to kind of tailor the approach to the specific interest and abilities of that child, which is huge.
Yeah. And I would say one thing that ties into you build the homeschooling schedule around your family's needs is seeing the families at our church that do homeschooling. It's like so cool. They like take these trips and they just kind of go whenever they want because they can.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean,
how
think
amazing
about
is that?
Think about how much money over 18 years you can save at Disney World by going during the school year instead of during the breaks.
Right. Yeah. And you could save so much time. The lines are much shorter.
Yeah. I mean, basically what we're saying is you will become a millionaire if you homeschool your kids because of how much,
And part of, and maybe this is like you're in charge of your child's learning, but, part of what I think is cool too is, once again, there's two extremes here, but you don't want your kid to never do schoolwork. But there's an element too where I'm like, your 5-year-old probably doesn't need to be in school 7-8 hours a day.
Right.
And so, if they do 4 hours of work and that's enough, that's great.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
teaching them a little bit more balance in their life, homeschooling can do. And I feel like homeschool kids get a little more touches. I mean, it's up to what the parents decide with some extracurricular activities too, because you have more time to do those things.
Well, and I think this is stereotypical and broad brush here, but in general, like the way like elementary schools are set up is targeted toward like young girls who are able to like sit still better, and not young boys who need to be like moving, and like there is a difference between a young boy and a young girl and how they develop.
Right.
And so I think that is a benefit, right, of like homeschooling is you can really like prioritize, especially with a young boy, getting outside a lot during the day and going into the woods and
so
it's important.
School, I mean, this is almost tailoring another conversation, but school is tailored more towards girls.
Yeah.
And I think that's why you see more girls succeeding in going to college, because girls, from I don't know if you want to say nature or nurture, but I think some of both. The sitting, being proper, reading, that's stuff that more is easier for a 6-year-old girl, whereas boys have all of this pent-up energy and need to get out. And you're right in that you can help, like go out in the woods and do this stuff in the middle of the day. And so it's a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. So some of the cons of homeschooling listed on the website. First, it's a huge commitment for parents. You do not get to drop them off at school. You're with them.
Yeah.
It can be expensive. You're buying supplies and curriculum and enrichment activities.
Because public school isn't free, but your taxes cover the vast majority of that cost.
My grandfather would call it included. It's not free; it's included.
It's included. Yes, yes.
But your taxes aren't paying for your homeschool.
Your homeschool, right? So you're paying. I don't even actually know how. You're still paying those taxes, right? If you live in the
and that's some degree of controversy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're still paying the taxes, and then you got to spend your own money to buy all the supplies and curriculum and all that stuff.
Right. It can be expensive. There may be fewer elective options, so you're less likely to be able to be in the band or the orchestra or on the football team.
Yeah. If you're homeschooled and in the marching band at your home, there's a lot of reasons why that could be weird.
Yeah, and like, I'm gonna want to meet your family, maybe. As someone who was the band captain for 4 years running in the Alpharetta High School marching band.
Right.
Yeah. It's possible for kids to fall through the cracks. It's possible that parents aren't able to give them the like quality education academically that they need after a certain level.
Right.
So that can be when you get to homeschooling calculus,
Right.
that could be an issue.
Right.
And then there's less peer-to-peer social interaction and quote real world exposure. So
Right.
some of the benefits of homeschooling, right, are you can shelter them from certain things.
Right.
The downside is like, well, they will experience those things eventually. So when is the right time to have exposure, So what do you think about these cons?
Yeah. I mean, once again, it makes a lot of sense. I think, are you able to commit this kind of time? Right. Do you, as the primary earner, make enough where one parent can stay at home?
Sure.
Right. That's a modern 2022 discussion.
It's a legitimate question.
I think, I think this is interesting, and homeschool parents, if you're listening to this, feel free to push back on me on this. But I think that idea of falling through the cracks is an interesting one, because it's when you're at private or public school, you have all of these teachers teaching specific subjects.
It's their specialty.
Specialty. And then you have kind of, 20 people doing specific things, teaching one subject, whereas at homeschool, you can only, maybe it's different with co-ops, but at homeschool, you're just one person.
Yep.
And I think something that I've seen that's interesting, and I asked you this question, is I didn't know any homeschool kids that went to Georgia Tech, which I think is a pretty good school.
Yeah.
And I heard of one, but he was 12. But so he was like a super genius, So he had like gotten his GED at 12 or whatever and went to Tech.
His name was Benjamin Franklin. It was a long time ago.
But I think it does seem to me that there's like the education is like different would be the word I would use.
I would, and I'm kind of ignorant on this point, but I would love to know, like, how do you, when we're getting up to something like calculus or AP chemistry,
right?
Like how does that work in a homeschool setting? That's a genuine ignorant question.
Yeah. So if you're a homeschool family, we'd love to learn. You let us know, because, and maybe, I can see arguments for this, which is like, the homeschool education is just as good, but the public school system for college just wants to see what was just a continuation of the public school system in.
Sure.
In whatever state you live in. And I can see that too. So I just don't know. Like, it just seemed to me from my anecdotal evidence that the quality of education is not the same as if you went to a good public or a good private school.
Sure.
So I'm willing to be corrected on that. I just it's just what I've seen. I just find it interesting.
Yep.
And the other thing too with the peer-to-peer social interaction is you just have that stereotype,
the homeschool stereotype. You do. And I will say, like, I did see, so I went to Georgia, like I said. I don't know if I knew a single homeschool kid that went to Georgia.
Which doesn't mean there weren't any at the universities we were at. I just found it interesting.
Yeah. But I did know some private school kids.
Right.
And some of them, not all of them, but some of them did go kind of crazy.
Right.
Because they were like so sheltered, they did not know.
Right.
Whereas growing up in a public school, I kind of saw everything.
Right.
So, there's kind of two ways to look at it. Like, one, you could make the argument, well, under my roof, I'm going to guard you from the outside world,
right,
and I'm going to teach you about it and prepare you to interact it when you leave this house.
Right.
Or the public school route, I guess you could say, is I'm going to let you like kind of experience, like I'm going to let you see it, and then hope that we have a good enough relationship where you're coming home and we're talking about it.
Right.
And you're like processing as we go.
Right.
But yeah, I think,
it's interesting because, first of all, if you homeschool, get your kids in a youth group, have them play sports on a team.
Yeah.
Because that will get you, because I do think exposure to other kids of other worldviews is really helpful.
Yep.
Now, like, I think having other adults indoctrinate your kids. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like just having kids with their own age, with different families and whatever is just really helpful. But I would say a lot of the homeschool students that I met, either when I was doing college ministry, honestly, just I was like, you don't live in reality. Like the thoughts that you were trying to get across, like I'm like, that's just not how the world works. But then the other thing is just the social interaction. I remember this guy told me like, oh, I was homeschooled, but don't worry, I'm not one of those homeschool kids.
Sure.
And I was like, that's how I know that you're exactly one of those homeschool kids. And he was, you know? And so don't tell your kids to say stuff like that, you know?
Don't be weird.
But it was interesting. I met this guy like 8 years later, and he had told me like he had learned a lot about the world and about life. And he was like, you know, as I look back, I just never learned how to socialize with people my age. I spent all my time with adults, so I feel really comfortable with people 20 years older than me, and really uncomfortable with people my own age, and that's why I acted this way. I would have conversations with your kids like just to make sure, like, are they comfortable socializing with other kids their age? This is super important to do. So like, I'm not saying like, I think you can have some really, I feel like the stereotype is if you homeschool, they're going to be weirdos. I don't think that's the case because I went to public school and there are plenty of weirdos there too.
Well, that seems to be part of the like co-op push, that a lot of like you're getting the best of both worlds. I think is what they'd say.
And let's be honest, like if my kids are a weirdo, whose fault is probably that? It's probably mine. Right. And so I think just being aware as a parent, like if you're spending that much time with your kids, you need to introspectively look at yourself and how
say,
you live.
Am I a weirdo?
And then be like, you know, they're probably gonna end up like you, right? I think that's especially like, you know, your kids are always like their parents in a lot of ways. But if the more social interactions they have with others, they'll become hopefully more self-aware and pick up other things from other people. And so you know, there's a lot of different influences, but just from a social aspect, just be aware of those things.
Yeah. It's well said.
Yeah.
All right. So that's homeschool. So let's move on to public school. So a few pros that they list on public school. The teachers are qualified. Like we said, they're kind of usually they have a specialty.
Yeah. They all went to UGA. Or KSU.
Or KSU.
Yeah.
They're mid-30s white women. Second, there may be more resources available. So since all the tax dollars are going there's probably more. It's just better funded.
Yes.
You know?
But I would say if you're a public school teacher listening to this, I bet you would disagree with that statement.
I bet you would.
But you're still more funded than a homeschool kids.
And let's be honest, it also depends on your zip code. So I mean that's
for sure.
Third, kids get exposure to the real world and to social experiences. And fourth and finally, it's free-ish. You already got to pay your taxes. Your taxes are going to this. So thoughts on these pros of public school?
Yeah, I think I think it's built into our society.
Yeah.
It's part of like, as we talk about majority culture, and I don't mean race, I'm just saying like public school for however many decades has been the majority of what people did.
Yep.
And so that's why it's free-ish. It's part of the taxes. There's more resources. The teachers are qualified. That's like when people think about teaching, most people think about teaching in the public school system.
Right.
So, yeah, I think there's a lot of pros. And I would say for me, what I have to be careful of is all the public schools I went to out of 10 were rated 10.
Yeah.
I went 10 to 10, 10, 10.
Yep.
And so I'm like, oh, I had a great education, great experience. And it's important for me to remember that's not how it all is.
Some have 4, 5, 6 or 3 through 3.
Yeah, my daughter currently goes to a Title I school, and that's weird for me.
Sure,
because I went to like basically the richest people went to my school.
Right.
So that's all I ever knew. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of benefit in general to public school, and I will say where public school is moving, and this is once again a different conversation of why it's moving towards this way. A lot of people have started using it basically as free daycare, and I think that's bad.
Yeah, it's a problem.
I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
I think as you move towards like, I think, it's funny. You look at kind of the feminist movement and the push for women to work and stuff. And women work, and both men and the husband and wife are at work.
Yep.
I know I'm going to get misquoted here. So I'm not saying women can't work. So don't quote me. Don't
what I heard you just say is you don't think women should go to college. That's what I just heard. Do you even want them to graduate from high school, Daniel?
No, I'm just kidding.
You chauvinist pig.
But I mean, if you follow the trajectory, that's how we got here.
Sure.
Public school has, in some senses, stopped acting as a school and more as a daycare for a lot of families.
Yeah.
But that's why like summers are shorter and they switch around the breaks. Kind of weird.
You know what's interesting is so I ran into this guy the other week that went to my high school growing up, and he like recognized me. I didn't recognize him at all. We were in totally different circles. And when he started talking about, hey, do you remember blah blah, I was like, oh, you were in that group, And it's like the really popular but like big troublemaker group.
Yeah.
And then he started, because I was like, I stayed away from that group entirely in high school. Then he started talking to me about like his childhood and his home life, which was a total wreck. I never knew this growing up.
Yeah.
And he started talking about some of his other friends in that group whose families were also total wrecks.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I never had the proper compassion for him during high school.
Yeah.
That like, oh, like you are acting out of a certain lack of like stability at home.
Yeah.
And so, but you do see that come up. Like, I mean, that is a good bit of the public school experience is dealing with kids who have totally absent parents.
Yeah.
Which is tragic. But I mean, we're on the pros. I do. Yeah, we're talking about all this now. Before we get to the cons, I do think one of the great things about public school is if you are an active parent and you're involved in the emotional and thought life of your kids, it gives you great opportunities to have great conversations about different faiths, different worldviews, different morality. And the other thing that I think can be really helpful, I think Christians can be really bad at giving like caricatures of non-Christians and non-Christian worldviews.
Yep.
And so like, for example, I think one of the things that the evangelical church in general has done, we portray like gay couples as these like horrible people.
Right.
And so you teach your kid, gay marriage, terrible people, awful sinners. And so like kids grow up thinking that, right? And then they meet some really happy, kind, loving, servant-hearted gay couples. And their whole worldview around gay marriage has been built upon gay couple bad.
Right.
And then they meet great people. And they don't know how to process that.
Right.
And I would say that's actually an insufficient worldview that doesn't take into account common grace. And the Christian worldview is more robust than that.
Right.
But I think what public school enables you to do is it actually introduces you to all of that.
Right.
And if you're willing to have the conversation, enables Christian parents to move past caricatures of non-Christian worldviews and people and actually talk to your kids about stuff. I think that's a huge pro if you leverage it correctly.
And I would say, I think there's a lot of pros to public school. Once again, like, it's hard to just generalize all public schools because they're all different.
Yep.
But I think a lot of times the education you can get, unless you're in a really bad school.
Sure.
We'll talk about the cons, but you could get horrible education in public schools.
Yeah.
But you could get a good education. I know for me, it was really helpful for me socially. I was like, looking back, I was like kind of an awkward kid.
Man, I definitely was.
And it really helped me. Because I was thrown in a sink or swim social environment, and I learned how to swim. It was It was good for me. I appreciate having to do that. And I just think, one of my best friends throughout school, he lives down the street from me.
Yeah.
You make good friends there, and you build. It gives you the opportunity to build relationships in a unique way.
And something else I'll say, and I'm sure you had this experience at Tech. When I went to Georgia, I went to, like you, like 10-10-10 or 9-9-9 schools,
right.
Great public schools. And when I went to Georgia, it was fine.
Right.
Like there was no like shift or
right.
horrible change. Yeah. I knew people that went to really bad public schools that were like drowning at
right.
Georgia. But one of the criticisms of the public school system sometimes is they don't really teach you to think. They just teach you to the test, the standardized test or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really legitimate critique. But what I would say is that's also the world we live in.
Yep.
And, you're going to need to get a job
yep.
someday. And, like, right or wrong, like, the job wants to see a degree from a university, and the university is looking at your test scores in high school, and they're giving you tests. And so whether we like it or not, like, that is our world. And your ability to, like, sink or swim in the world is somewhat dependent upon going through the hoops of the world.
I would say I disagree with much of the world.
Yeah.
But I was prepared for it because of my experience.
It is what it is.
And so I think it's up to you, parents, to prepare your kids to how to be in the world but not of the world.
Yep.
Right? And so but I would say this, and I'll say this now. Some people say, oh, I want my kids in the public schools so they can like evangelize their friends. I'm like, and I will say, your 5-year-old's evangelizing no one.
Yeah, because your 5-year-old's probably not saved. Sorry. I know they prayed the prayer. Yeah, a covenant child. Yeah, okay.
And so they could be. So we're not God. We're not making that judgment. I'm just saying in general, right? And so even if you're a kid saved at 5, no one's evangelizing the other 5-year-old kids. Like, I've never seen it,
right?
And so that's not a good reason to keep your kids at the public school. I'm just going to throw that out there because it's much more likely that if you're just like, oh, he or she is his own person and they're going to go be missionaries or whatever in the school system at like 6 years old. I'm like, no, you need to be involved. That's just what I'm saying.
Right.
You need to be the parent.
Yep.
Right. And I'm talking to myself here. It's like, you need to ask good questions every day your kids come home from school. You need to make sure you know what the teachers are teaching. You need to make sure that we've told my daughter, like, if your teacher or anyone in your class ever says, don't tell your parents, you need to come home and that's the first thing you need to do is tell us.
For sure.
Like, have that conversation with your kids. Like, there's no secrets, right?
Yeah.
And so, I just wanted to throw that out there before we get to the cons because that's kind of like a neutral point, I guess.
Yeah, but well said.
This is a call for parents to be parents to your kids.
Yeah. But I do think, I think the elementary school age is a little too young. But for me, like I was probably saved around 8 years old. And by middle school, I was evangelizing my fellow students.
No, I think it's a great.
And I was actively standing up. Like in ninth grade biology, like I was actively standing up against the evolution being taught in my public school. So like it can
we should
happen.
do a podcast on evolution. We haven't done one yet, right?
That would be good.
Yeah. Because there's like a lot of stuff in secular journals that's coming out that, no one's paying attention to it, but are saying like there needs to be a different.
Maybe we shouldn't talk about apes all the time.
Yeah, they're like secular scientists are like, we may need to come up with another theory than the one that's been held for the past 50 years.
Yeah.
So 13-year-old
I'm gonna
was
get validated.
Yeah.
So I do think it can happen, and I do think like in preparation for ministry, I'm grateful for that kind of quote missionary experience. But I do think it's too much to expect that of your 5-year-old.
It is.
So going to cons, a few things. Classes are not taught from a biblical worldview. Class sizes are large or can be. I mean, you could be dealing with 30 kids in a class sometimes. There's more negative social influences, bullying, peer pressure, drugs. There's plenty to go around. It's driven by standardized testing, which we talked about. and the quality can vary significantly, which we also talked about. I mean,
Right.
not all public schools are made alike.
Yep.
So, thoughts on the cons?
I have a million thoughts on the cons of public school.
1, 2, 3, go.
But okay, so starting with not tough from biblical worldview, I think for me, I was public school all the way
Yeah.
until fairly recently. And
Like you were supportive all the
of
way.
it. Yeah. I wasn't in public school this whole time.
Just graduated high school.
But not everything is CRT and not everything is LGBTQ, but it is entering our schools more and more.
Sure.
From what I can tell, it hasn't reached our area yet to the extent that is scary to me. Because I did a lot of research on it before sending my kid to public school. But it does scare me.
Yep.
Like we said at the beginning of the podcast, it might come a day where we're like, nope, homeschool everyone.
Sure.
I don't think that day is today. And so that's where we're going to speak from.
Yeah.
But I think there are some teachers more and more that are being pushed out of colleges, even colleges like UGA, Kennesaw, Georgia Southern, whatever, Georgia State, that more and more those teachers are being indoctrinated by the current worldview of today. And it does scare me. It does scare me where the public school system is headed in terms of that worldview.
Yeah. I think, and this is one of the like debates that has like sprung up in our culture at large is, school should be about the 3 R's, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic. And it's like, those aren't 3 R's, but, public school education.
It
you know
is,
what I'm saying?
if you live in the South.
Reading, writing, arithmetic. But often what we're starting to see is some of those subjects are being infused with other things,
right?
And that's a concern for parents. Like, hey, could you just stick to reading, writing, arithmetic?
Right.
So that's going to vary from place to place, but yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, obviously, biology was a very evolutionary worldview, and I want my kids to learn about the theory of evolution.
Yeah.
My problem has always been, as a science teacher, I want you to teach me all the theories.
Yes.
I'm not asking I don't want my public high school to teach my kids Genesis 1. I'll take care of that. Thank you very much.
Right.
But I would like you to teach with enough humility to teach a theory as a theory.
Yes.
And not as fact.
Right.
But, when I was in high school, I mean, that was a big piece. And then we did have a gay pride club, or I forget, Gay Straight Alliance, I think was the name of the club. And they actually ran a hit piece on me in the school newspaper, and specifically at Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
They tried to cancel you before cancel culture.
Oh, it was great.
Oh, nice.
But we had a Christian on the newspaper staff that allowed me to write a rebuttal. So I got to share the gospel on like front page of the school newspaper with everybody because I got attacked first.
Nice.
So I was like, I'll take that.
What a cool opportunity.
So yeah, I think there are, I mean, that's obviously a con of like, I think we used to be way back when in a positive Christian world where in the public schools, like my grandfather, who is a public elementary principal, prayed on the intercom every morning.
Wow.
That world has not existed for a long time.
Right.
And then for a while, it was like a neutral world where it was like, okay, like you do your thing, I'll do my thing.
Right.
I mean, we are in a negative world
We are.
where Christianity is viewed as bigoted, and so like as a parent, you need to think through that. You need to know like how prevalent that is in the school that you're going to,
right?
Because it's going to vary from school to school,
right?
But I think that's a legitimate big con of public schooling.
Yeah, the thing is, I would say if I was living in like California or Washington State or maybe even Virginia, like
it's like
the stuff is being
game over.
I probably would have pulled them out already.
Yeah.
Once again, it depends on the specific school.
Yeah.
But I don't think a lot of that has reached the Bible Belt yet, at least in totality. Like I'm talking in a general sense. I'm sure there's some schools around here that you should be scared of, but
And you know, I mean, on like biblical worldview and like sexuality, yeah, I forgot the exact statistic, but like Gen X, it was like 1 in 20
Right.
identified as like LGBTQ, and millennials like 1 in 10, and like Gen Z is like 1 in 5 or something. So it is like
I think it went from
quadrupled.
5% to 36% or something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on.
So you have
That's like biologically impossible for that
Yeah.
to be actually true. Yeah.
absolutely. So you have a bunch of kids who are confused anyway. I mean, what's more awkward than a middle schooler? Nothing.
Yeah. 2 middle schoolers.
3. So you have people that are already just trying to figure your hormones, you're just trying to figure stuff out, and then you add in this like, you know, anti-biblical worldview that is supported by a lot of the parents of the kids going to that school, and that's something to think about.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. I think this is probably the biggest objection
yep,
to public school. And I would say, yeah, I feel you.
yep,
And yeah, so I be careful of that. I
Yep.
think for the classroom sizes are a large thing is interesting to me because I always was in big classrooms and it never bothered me.
yeah,
I really think that how well your child does in school is primarily what you do at home with them.
yep,
Do you help them with the math problems? Are you involved with their homework and projects?
for sure.
And then also just natural ability of your child.
Right.
You know, I told Meredith, and we'll see how true this rings out, but you know, I'm Asian, if you guys didn't know that by now. And you know, if it's like kind of like if you ain't first, you're last. It's like if it's not an A, it's an F. Right. You know, that's like kind of how my mind thinks.
Yeah, don't bring this A- home either. Yeah.
But I told Meredith, I'm like, what I want is like, if I want our kids to try to the best of their ability, and if they're actually like not intelligent enough to get an A in the class that they're taking, I can live with that.
Yeah.
But if
you'll disown them, but you can live with it. Yeah.
But if they are intelligent enough and they don't get an A, that's what I have a problem with. And so, but anyways, the classroom side thing doesn't really bother me. Negative social influences, yeah, I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
That's part of the worldview thing, I think, too. Yep. I was bullied some. It wasn't great. You know, one of the guys who bullied me, who probably like never even thought about me ever again. I remember like 5 years ago, I was like, it was the 10-year reunion, and I was like, I can't wait. I remember thinking in high school, I can't wait 10 years from now when these kids are like, that bullied me, they're all like broke because they made horrible life decisions.
They work at McDonald's selling those fries that I don't like to eat because I like Checkers better.
Right. I went on this guy's Facebook just ready to just like in my heart just like laugh at him.
Yes.
He became a Christian, just had Bible verses plastered all over his wall, and I was so humbled. I was so humbled by the Lord.
Forgive me.
I was so humbled in the Lord in that moment. But once again, like, I think the negative social influences you need to watch out for.
Yeah.
But great conversation too, because
Sure.
Those kids probably have bad home lives, a lot of them.
Right. Definitely things to.
And the quality can vary significantly.
I mean, that's big.
Oh my gosh. So being at KSU, I mean, I met a student that couldn't do 3 times 3. And
I mean, it's 12, obviously. Go on.
It's 9, by the way, just, you know. I was, for the first time, was like, oh, when people are like, oh, the public school system has failed you, I was like, I get it.
That's what. No,
and I think there's got to be a baseline threshold. You have to, like, 3 times 3. You got to be able to do that. If your school didn't teach you that, I mean, there's some schools that kids leave and they don't know how to read.
Right. I mean,
that happens.
And so when I was at Georgia, I knew a guy that was valedictorian of his public high school that just got crushed at Georgia, and I mean, his school failed him.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is the valedictorian.
Yeah.
You know. So yeah, it really can vary, and so you gotta be aware of what you're walking into.
Yeah.
As a parent.
Yeah, I think the whole thing here is have a realistic awareness of what's actually going on.
Yeah.
So things may be worse than you think they are. Things might be better than you think they are. Or maybe you have a realistic view. But as you do your research to see what school you need to send your kid to, have a realistic expectation and like reality of the situation you're actually sending them into.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So that's public school. Now private school. And I think 3 categories might be helpful for private school. One, you could have a secular private school. It's not religious based. It's just for rich people.
Right.
That's one option. Second, you can have like a covenant Christian private school,
Right.
which means the parents have to sign a statement of faith to be a part of that school.
Yes.
A specific statement of belief.
Yeah. So for like a Christian private school, which is the third category, the teachers have to sign a statement of faith. I'm a Christian.
Yep.
For a covenant school, it says the parents all sign saying
Yes.
I'm a Christian.
So
And then usually you have to be super involved in the school, and you like teach these classes, and you're like you have to be really involved with the school if you send them there. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're sending your kid to a secular private school, I mean, it's going to be the same as a public school, except people are rich. If you send them to a covenant Christian school, all the families are coming from the same perspective.
Right.
If you send them to just a Christian school, most likely the teachers will have to be Christian, but the students might be coming from a Muslim family or a Buddhist family or an atheist family, and their parents just wanted them in a private school.
Right.
So those distinctions
Are
may not totally show up in these pros and cons that they list, but it's worth looking into because you're going to have different experiences.
Right.
Some pros: private schools, quality of education is high. Kids have positive social influences. Parents can leave their kids with caretakers they trust. Yeah, I'll go ahead and start out with my opinion because of the that I said. I've seen private school kids. The positive social influence, I mean, maybe you can argue from the teacher's perspective because they're Christians, but and maybe a little better in a covenant Christian school, but I mean there are crazies in private school just like public.
I would say you get a mix, right? So like you have positive social influences from the teachers and from some of the students, but you're also going to get, I remember talking to my friend who went to like a Title I school, high school, and someone had asked him like, "Oh, do you have like drug and gun problems?" He's like, "No, those things cost money."
Right.
But it's like, yeah, like you're gonna have a unique set of issues when you get a bunch of rich kids together.
Yeah, I had a bunch of cocaine in my BMW and I got busted.
And then you're also gonna get like,
Yeah,
you're also gonna get a lot of the, and we're talking in stereotypes here, but like some of the entitlement and what comes along with that. Those kids bring in a unique set of, discipline problems in the school too.
Yeah, when you go to private school, Disney World for spring break is like a joke. It's like, oh, sorry, we went to our family's private island.
Yeah, which we built our own Disney World on. Yeah. No, I discipled a guy who said if you didn't own a second, if you didn't have a mansion and then another summer mansion,
right,
you were
poor.
You were not just poor; you were made fun of for being poor.
Oh,
can you imagine that? And so you're going to have a different set of social influences here.
Right.
But I would say in terms of like a Christian worldview, from the teacher's perspective, you're probably going to get a more positive one.
Sure, for sure. And you're not going to be getting the secular.
I think the quality of education is generally high. I would say in private schools, it's more consistently high, maybe, than public schools.
I would.
But you're going to get some real dummies in the private school too.
Yeah.
So it's not like I think you use the term, what is it, like addition parenting or whatever, like A plus B. Like if I send my kid to
addition parenting doesn't work. If I just homeschool them or send them to a private school and drop them off at youth group, they will become a Christian. Yeah. A plus B equals C. It's like that's not how it works.
And it doesn't work with education too.
Yep.
I can't just take my kid, put them in a good school, and then they're going to be a good student. That's not how it works.
Yep.
Yeah.
Forgive me for my public school bias here, especially as a North Fultonite. True bias. I would push back a little bit on like. I actually think if you're in North Fulton, if you're just going to private school for the academic quality,
right?
I think you're probably wasting your money in North Fulton.
Yeah.
If you're spending $20,000 to send your kid to a private school and you live in North Fulton, and it's just for the academic part, I'm thinking not.
Here's why you do that, and this is what I told Meredith when we decided to, in our school district instead of the Johns Creek School District, which has like, they call it Johns Korea, like as a joke, right? Because they're Asians. I was like, I told Meredith, I was like, you really want our half Asian kids to compete with the full Asian kids? Like, no way, You want them to be the big fish in a small pond, not a medium fish in a humongous pond.
And so I guess you could make that.
That'd be the only reason
for private school,
yeah, from the education side. That's the only, yeah. But you're right. Like, if your school system is 10, 10, 10 all the way across in terms of education perspective,
right,
you're not going to get much better. You're going to get better than that. Yeah.
So, but I mean, yeah. Cons, it's expensive.
Man, I can't even tell you. It's probably more expensive than college. A lot of colleges.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the private schools around us are about $20,000 a year.
Right.
Like starting in like kindergarten.
Right.
You're paying $20,000 for your kindergarten.
It's crazy.
Hello. It's not an impenetrable bubble, so there are problems. It may not prepare students for the quote real world,
and that's what you were saying with some private school kids went to college and just went nuts, right?
Yeah. I mean, and then resources may be limited. I mean, not in the private schools around here. Yeah, I don't know what private school you're talking about.
But yeah, I'm sure there are some. But I think with private school, one of the biggest negatives I've seen is that Christians send their kids to a Christian private school, assuming they'll be Christians, but then they get jaded from taking Bible class as an academic thing, and so they only view the Bible as like a textbook.
Yep.
I've seen that. So if you send your kids to private school, be aware of that. Because you want the Bible to be what it is.
Yeah.
The Word of God, living and active, piercing your heart. But if you send your kids to private school, especially a Christian school, you have to be aware that your kids might get jaded from the Bible because they'll see it as a textbook and not the Word of God.
You know what's interesting? I actually just pieced this together at this very moment. So you're welcome.
This is the first time you'll ever hear this.
Had this thought before. Homeschool families tend to be some of the greatest church members that exist.
Agreed.
And in my experience, painting with a broad brush, private school families can be some of the worst.
Interesting.
Because what I've seen a lot of times, homeschool families, they're like, I got to have the church. I mean, we're alone during the week. This is a source of community. I want my kids around other kids. They don't get this during the week. Public school families are like, we need the church. Like, they're in the secular environment all week.
Right.
Private school families, I've seen a lot, is like, well, they have a small group with their school.
Right.
They have chapel with their school. They don't need the youth group at church.
Right.
I've seen a lot over the years of private Christian schools almost like edging out the church in the family's life.
Yeah.
And they say, well, they don't need the youth group at church. They don't really need a small group at church. They don't really, like, school is our church.
Right.
And I would say, yeah, your private school's not in the Bible. So,
and I would say it has to depend probably on the administration the most. I know we've been really, really fortunate to have some like high-level private school administrators come to our church.
Sure.
And they are the most church
absolutely
people ever. And so like we have been really fortunate to have them at our church. But yeah, depending on what school you go to and what your administration's like, I know even in a lot of private schools, like the spiritual life, they have one, but it's just not good.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
And once again, at our church, we've just been so fortunate to have these people who are private school administrators who are just solid.
Yes.
But that's not every private school.
Yeah. And just to answer any lingering questions any listeners may be having inside their minds right now. Yeah. I actually was not actually referring to anyone at our church. Because we have some private school people who are great, but in the past that has been an issue, which is interesting. And I think it's part administration of the school and what they tell the parents to focus on, and then at the end of the day, I mean, people are going to make their own decisions. So the administration can be all about church as much as possible, but parents can still ignore that. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the homeschool, public school, private school. What are your closing thoughts and where you kind of land currently?
Yeah, so where I land is if money was no issue, I think I would land on the private school route.
Yeah.
And there's specifically private school in our area I'd love to send our kids to. So if you're listening, I know some of you are listeners.
You know who you are.
Yeah, help me out. Throw me a bone.
Yeah, the 25% pastor discount's not going to cut it.
Yes. Let's think about 125% discount.
Yeah, give us money to attend your school.
No, but we appreciate you guys if you are listening. But I think what's going on in the world and what's happening in the public school systems does scare me.
Yeah.
It doesn't scare me enough to pull out my kids right now. But I've told Meredith, I'm watching out for it. Mm-hmm. And if I get like the teacher is trying to tell Charlotte that she's a boy, we are out immediately. We're not finishing the year.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's kind of where I land with that. I think with homeschool, I was opposed to it for a long time in my life. I'm not opposed to it now. I'm just not sure practically it makes the most sense unless we're forced to do it.
Yeah.
And by forced, I mean like I can't send my kid to that public school anymore, and
I can't afford that private school,
so we'll do it. I'm not against it. I don't. I just think from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure it makes the most sense for our family, for a variety of different reasons. And so I think where I land is my preference right now is probably Christian private school. So like covenant private schools, you're almost like too insular. Mm-hmm. But Christian private schools, like I know there's a school around our area that's like 25 to 50% Christian, and then 75 to 50% non-Christian. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. You get the influences of the teachers who are Christian, and then they get to have that almost like social public school environment where there's just a mix, right? I really like that, and so I think where I land is, I'm very watchful. I'm like, I tell you all the time, like, I'm like, if you really heard all my views, you would call me a quote unquote conspiracy theorist, I'm not as bad as like some of the stuff that people are posting out there, but like I'm worried. I'm worried where the culture is headed, and I'm worried how it's going to trickle down into the public schools. Mm-hmm. I don't believe it's reached us in our area in Georgia yet. Mm-hmm. Not like maybe a little bit in some, like you might have like a book in the library or whatever. Sure. That's you wouldn't agree with, but I don't think the teachers are like hiding, like trying to like change your child's gender and not tell you. I don't think that's here we're in our area,
the Great Peach State.
And so, but I'm cautious towards the public schools, ready to hit the panic button. Sure. I'm not hitting the panic button yet. Yep. And if you were to ask me my preference, I'd probably love to send them to one of our local private schools. Yeah. But right now, my daughter's in public school and she loves it. She loves the bus. She loves being at school. She's learned a lot. I've been pretty impressed so far. Yeah. If I'm to be honest, but we're 7 days in. So. Right. What about you?
I would I'd lean slightly different maybe. I probably have a preference toward public, and we're planning to do public. That's my preference. We'll take it year by year and kid by kid.
You're the public school your kids are going to go to is rated higher than my kids.
Yeah, that's true. And that we were that was a thought we had as we looked at houses. I mean, we talked a lot about the public schools, and I think my reasoning is a fewfold. I do tend to think the academics really matter to me because that's the world we live in. And
it's also in your
opens
family.
And closes doors. Yeah, I mean, I come from a family of educators. The second reason for me was I was highly impacted by extracurriculars.
Right.
Both different clubs, like the Beta Club was a big, I learned to do public speaking in Beta Club.
Right.
You know, I learned how to lead in Beta Club. Band was.
It's so funny. I was in Beta Club and NHS in college.
Yeah.
And I didn't do any of those things. It's
Yeah.
because you were very involved. You were a good student.
Yeah, I mean, I was. Yeah,
I was a terrible student.
I was like president of like the 3 largest clubs in my high school.
That's
like,
so funny.
I controlled my high school.
I was president of the Key Club, which
Yes.
I learned was like an old rich white man club.
Yes.
And it was like me and my brothers were like the presidents for like you know,
Years.
like 6 or 7 years. And yeah, we basically operated as like a mafia for that club in
you
the
go.
school. Like we kept like no one voted. We just passed down the leadership
Yep.
to certain people and stuff.
How to do it.
Yeah. Anyways, go ahead. That was the only president of a club I was of. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really impactful for me. Our band, like, we got to perform in Carnegie Hall.
That's cool.
And so those, like, music is very important to me, and I think it's like very shaping, and I think public schools do that the best. And so those kind of opportunities, sports, music, the opportunity to be on a team, I think really can shape character in a powerful way.
Yeah.
So between the academics, opportunity to be shaped by extracurriculars, and I just had I was blessed with some great Christian teachers who took their role seriously, you know.
Yeah.
To kind of share their faith, and I understand not everyone gets that, but
And if you are a public school teacher and you're a Christian, thank you.
yeah,
Like,
for
really,
sure,
thank you.
for sure.
Yeah, you are so needed.
So I'm grateful for the public teachers that were impactful to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's where I lean, but I do have concerns, especially on the LGBTQ agenda in the public square. I have concerns about just an anti-biblical worldview.
Right.
We're gonna be monitoring it.
Yeah. But it doesn't. It seems like it scares you less than it probably scares me.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's the right words to use, but
you know,
like,
Hillary had a friend that had a great reaction that encapsulates the kind of parent I want to be. So their daughter is like a first grader in a public school, and she went to the library and found kind of a LGBTQ kind of book. Whatever it was kind of promoting that.
right.
And instead, like, she went home and told her mom, which is awesome. Like, you built up trust, so she's telling you about it. And instead of freaking out, all she did was been like, man, that's really sad that they don't follow God's commands and God's rules. Don't you think so?
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, it is. And then they moved on. And I was like, that feels like a better way to handle it to me. It's not a freak out. It's you're calm, and then you move on. And so, yeah. And I think, that's kind of the parent I'd like to be. So that's kind of how I lean now. We'll see how it changes when they come home with a story like that. But
it's hard to predict the culture, you know?
Yeah.
Because I read something recently that it was trending. There was something, #LGB without the T. And it was not Christians tagging that.
interesting.
It was people in the LGBT community that were saying that the T's have like hijacked the LGBT communities.
Well, they have.
And and they're like, even like the people in that community are calling the T's like groomers and all this stuff.
Sure.
And we've always said like the gospel worldview is built on God as foundation.
Yep.
And that never
Yep.
shifts, moves, cracks. But the current culture is built on no foundation, and eventually they'll attack themselves. And so I'm like, is that what's going to happen? When will that? I think it will. It will happen.
Yeah.
But when? When will that happen? Is it going to happen in a year or 20 years? We don't know.
Yeah.
And so does it get worse? Does it get better? We don't know. It's hard to predict.
I do think the movement has overplayed their hand, and I do think there will be like a pendulum swinging correction.
Right.
But yeah, when, where, how, what exactly that looks like, we can't see. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's a big decision, but I think, like Daniel, you've said throughout the podcast, important thing is that like, don't press autopilot, be involved.
Yes.
This is on you.
Yep.
If you're a parent,
Yep.
this is on you. It is your responsibility to shape the moral fiber of your child. It is your responsibility to oversee their education.
Yep.
So whichever one you choose, it's not on their teacher, it's on you.
Yep.
So you got to carry that weight and that responsibility, and just don't press autopilot, and watch the heart of your child as they grow.
Yep.
Look at the heart, analyze the heart more than anything else.
Right.
And guard the heart above all else, for it's the wellspring of life. So watch out for the heart.
Yep.
And
Pray. There's pros and cons to every decision
Yeah.
you make for this. There's not one. I'm just not a big believer of just like broadly just saying this is the right one.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you say that, right?
Unless you're the Mandalorian, and that's kind of your motto.
This is the way.
This is the way.
Yeah. Make the best decision for your family, and and I'll say it again for us. If it comes to a point where we're like, there's only one decision left, we will say that. We're like,
Sure.
we will let you know on this podcast that
We're not afraid to be canceled.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining the conversation. We know this is a long podcast, but there's a lot to talk about. So I hope it was helpful. As always, feel free to write us, info@christfellowshipga.org, and follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And until next time, we'll talk to you then.